Well, money is a subject that both elicits a lot of emotion, sometimes anxiety and stress, and it is pertinent and important to literally every single American because we all need money to survive. What are some of the smartest things you can do with money? How can you hang on to more of it? How can you truly build wealth for you and your family on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a year over year basis, and ultimately saving for retirement? We're going to be talking about that today and a whole lot more on the Brian Hirsch Show. Well, greetings everybody, wherever you may be. I hope this video and or podcast finds you well. You know, handling money is a kind of a basic life lesson that unfortunately in today's world, fewer and fewer people, it would seem, are being taught how to handle money. I would venture to guess that most people don't really understand where money comes from, how money is generated, much less how to handle it. Now, one of the things that I've discerned with, um, I would say most people, but particularly young people, is that we're conditioned to view money as something that is only for fun. So think of it like this. When I was a little kid, arcade games and arcade actually centers where, strip malls would open up an arcade. They were really, really popular, and most of the games took a quarter to operate. And, I would beg my parents and plead my parents. And I remembered one particular time, it probably wasn't my parents, maybe it was a grandparent, but they handed me a roll of $10 in quarters. And I thought I had struck it rich. I was the king of the castle, and I could not wait to go down to the local arcade and drop all $10 into the arcade and just have, an hour or two of fun. But we were conditioned to think that money is only for fun. But what we must understand is that money is to be respected and that it's not only for fun, it's also to meet our basic necessities. And it's also something that we need to build up a bulwark for protection against, calamity and things that may come our way. Now, today we have as an incredibly special guest, a good friend of mine who's a bright mind. He's a certified public accountant who's going to help us today to talk more about how to be smart with money. And I would like everybody to please welcome to the Brian Hirsch Show, Dr. Rick Ardito. What is up, my brother?
How you doing, Brian? Thanks for having me on.
Better than I deserve. And thank you so much for coming on. There's no way we're going to be able to exhaust all that you know in that mind of yours. But we can talk about some things about being smart with money. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Rick, where did you grow up?
You know what, Brian? I grew up right here. Went to school in Hesperia, California, right here in the desert.
Hesperia High School?
No, I went to Sultana High School. So I
Okay.
went to Sultana High School, went to Hesperia Junior High, Sultana High School. Before that, New Life Christian School when that was a thriving private school. Then Eucalyptus Elementary. So roots right here, local in. Grew up in Hesperia and then Apple Valley for part of it too, but always went to school in Hesperia.
You're an OG to the high desert.
I am, yeah. And you know what, your story about the $10 in quarters, it reminded me of a time when I was growing up. One time we went to Laughlin and I found a $1 casino coin in the arcade, and I gave it to my dad and I told him to put it in this slot machine, and he won $10, and I was able to get $10 of quarters, and same thing, just waste it in the arcade. So that's awesome. Conditioned the same way,
That's awesome. So you went to school at CBU or?
Yeah. So actually I started at UC Riverside.
Okay.
And at the time I was still living up here. My parents were building a house. So I was actually living in Hesperia in a rental house while they were building their house in Apple Valley. My mom and stepdad were. And I was working 40 hours a week at Best Buy over in Victorville when it used to be over there by where like Toys R Us and everything was. and commuting down to UCR as a full-time student, just man, killing myself. So I took part of that year off, and I moved to South Texas, a little place called Mission McAllen area, and did ministry for like 8 months. Um, and right on the border of Mexico, right like 6 miles from Reynosa, Mexico. Went into Mexico a lot. That was in like 2003, 2004. And then went back to school to CBU when I left that program.
So you attained your undergraduate degree in accounting, I presume.
Yep, I have a
Right.
bachelor's of science in accounting, and then I have an
Okay.
MBA. People are familiar with that, master's of
Yep.
business administration,
Yep.
and then I have a doctor of business administration from Liberty University with an emphasis in accounting.
Good gracious, that's a lot of school.
Yeah.
That's a lot of school. I hope that, I hope it's paying off for you, buddy.
You know what? I never necessarily planned to go get a doctorate, but when I finished my master's degree, I had a professor chase me down in the hallway and ask me to apply to teach some accounting courses at CBU.
Uh,
Um, and so I started teaching some courses, and about a year later, they asked me to come on full time. And I had already kind of started my business and was working another full time job, and the timing actually was what really worked out because there was some other things going on at the company that I was full time at with a it's a long story, but a little bit of misappropriation of assets that the company didn't necessarily care about, even though I brought it to their attention. And was a good time for me to get out. And that specific branch in that company no longer exists anyway. So I'm glad that I'm not there.
wow.
Yeah.
So, one of the things, in my business, the real estate world, people come to me and they say, "Hey, Brian, I'm thinking about," I love this, "going into real estate." And I think that for a lot of folks, they have a perception of real estate as, kind of like any other 9 to 5 type job where you punch a clock and you work so many hours and then are compensated. I think they think that, you're going to get, some nice clothes. You're going to get your little pen that says, Rick Ardito, Century 21, and then you're going to go daily to the office. And as a result, you're just going to excel in sales and you're just going to make a ton of money. And that's the thinking is I'm exchanging time for money, which the
Mhm.
real estate world does not work that way at all. And for that matter, neither does your world at this point, right?
Right.
You own your own business. And so what I try to sit down with people and help them to understand is you're starting a business. Okay. So you're going to have to learn how to work for yourself and go through the process. And that's a whole nother podcast of building a successful real estate business. To some degree, though, I think to launch us into this idea of being smart with money, everyone is in business for themselves. It's just a matter of how you're attaining income to underwrite you Inc., if you want to call it that, or your
Mhm.
family, the family finances. And I think that most people go into adulthood without any concept or idea of income and expenses, profit and loss, a balance sheet, or any of this. So I think for our audience, and we talked a little bit about the number of people in your experience that have, some kind of a financial education, and you estimated that to be what?
Yeah, I mean, some sort of deeper competency in finance. I would say it's probably somewhere between 15 and 20% of people that I work with.
So the vast majority of people, and probably 80%, 75 to 80% or 85% of the people watching and listening have never really been taught about money. I don't know how much they're even teaching in school at this point, right?
Not a lot. I'm sure even in high schools, or I mean, even a lot of people with college degrees don't have a lot of general finance competencies, right? If you haven't gone and gotten a business or an economics degree or something like that, chances are you probably have very little, if any, formal education in finance. Not that it has to be formal, but unless you've sought it out yourself, then you're not going to have any real education in financial matters.
So because people maybe don't have the information, the decision making and how money is dispersed on a monthly basis may not be the best. So if you could walk through, think of it like if you're almost, teaching your own sphere of influence or your own kids for that matter, like help our audience understand what are the 3 or 4 things that every family should be doing to be smart with money?
Right. Okay. So, first of all, what's interesting about what we were talking about before in just having a basis of knowledge and understanding us in financial matters. And you always say something when I ask you something, you always say better than I deserve, which is famously said by Dave Ramsey, right? And he's built this giant empire of how to teach people about money, right? And I don't necessarily agree with all of the things that he does, but I think the reason why he does it that way is it works for a really large number of people, right?
Right. Right.
It's not necessarily for everybody, but it's for a mass of people, right? And he has some good advice for people. I think the number one thing that you should have to do, and Dave would agree with this, as far as, hey, what am I going to do with the money that I have? I think the very, very first thing you need to do is have some kind of an emergency fund, right? You know, look at what your monthly expenses are and say, hey, what's the minimum amount of money I need to get by for 2 or 3 months if I get hurt, can't go to work, whatever it might be, right? So I think that is one thing that I really agree with Dave Ramsey on is building that emergency fund first and foremost, right? It's nice to be debt free. It's nice to get out from under some of these things, but that emergency fund I think is the most important thing any family could do to start out. The next thing I would say, and this is where I disagree with Dave Ramsey, I'm not as anti-debt as he is,
Right.
but what I am anti is high interest debt.
Mhm.
Right. So any high interest debt, a lot of times this is going to be credit cards, bad car loan, things like that. I would say pay those off as quickly as you can. A little personal short story. My wife didn't have the best childhood growing up, and kind of tumultuous parents with some issues, and her mom had used her credit a number of times and really wrecked her credit. So when she was finally able to go out and buy her first car all by herself, she had this used like a 2001 Mustang, something like that, right? And we were dating at the time, and I can't remember if we were engaged or not yet, but we were close to being engaged. And I found out that the interest rate on her car loan was like 20 something percent. And I
Ouch.
was like, nope. And I literally called the bank and paid it off that day. And I said, you can make payments to me now. 0% interest. You're not paying 20 something percent interest on the car loan. But that was just the only way she could do it because her credit had been wrecked, not by her,
Right.
So yeah, that's a really, really good thing. If we can look at, hey, what high interest debt do we have? And if we can get that paid off as quickly as possible, even if, maybe even a debt consolidation to roll a couple of high interest debts into a more reasonable interest rate, something that we can pay off easier, better, faster without paying so much interest. I think that would be number 2 for me.
So both of those things, which those are wonderful advice. I think, Dave, if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey's baby steps, baby step 1 is to save $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a rainy day fund, not a rainy day, but what he calls a Murphy fund. So if you have a dishwasher break, or the the radiator in your car busts or something, that you've got money to have for those things to protect you against those things. And then the second step is for him is to go use the debt snowball.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you organize the debts and you pick the one that's smallest,
Pay that off and
you
roll it
make
in.
minimum payments
Yeah.
everywhere else, and you throw everything extra. And then after that, you do a 3 to 6 month emergency fund.
Mm-hmm.
Which all of that is just dynamite. The one thing though, and maybe you could shed some light on this, is both of the things you've mentioned so far, saving up for an emergency fund and paying down high interest debt, requires you to either A, spend less, or B, make more.
Right. Yep. Definitely. So these are, and Dave will tell you, do both, right? He'll say, hey, get on that beans and rice diet and go get a second job because you got to get your finances in order. And I think to an extent, those are both pieces of good advice. It's not necessarily easy for everyone to make more, but there are ways that you can find to bring in a little bit of additional income, shoot, I'm a baseball guy. Go down to the little league and go take some umpire training and go earn 50, 60, 70 bucks a game to go umpire little league baseball. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but you can do 3 or 4 games on a Saturday, 3 or 4 times a month. That can really help you kind of build that $1,000 emergency fund, whatever it might be, pay off that debt. But you've got to be willing to go out there and do that in order to kind of get yourself where you want to be, right? Does that mean you're going to be umpiring little league games forever? No. Maybe you'll love it. Maybe you will, but it's an option to go out there and find a way to make a little bit of extra money and get yourself where you want to be. My next biggest thing for people is once you if you can get out from under that debt, right? If you can build that emergency fund, now we've eliminated some of those payments, right? That are monthly things that are chipping away, making us live paycheck to paycheck, right? Now we can look at, hey, how do we now let our money work for us? How do we use this money to do some additional investing, right? So we can hopefully generate some income. And I think that's ultimately where people want to get to. You mentioned, one way or another, we all kind of work for ourselves. You're either selling your time directly to your customers, or you're selling your time to a business who's basically selling it to their customers, right? But ultimately, I think if you can find a way to leverage that time better, whether that's through improving your skills so you can get a better job, or using some of that money you're able to set aside and start your own business. I think that's where real financial freedom starts, is where you figure out a way to really leverage that time better, right? Nobody wants to go to work and make minimum wage every day in and day out. It's really hard to get ahead in life. But I mean, even a lot better than that in today's markets with the inflation that we've seen can be tough. I think that if you're a family, let's say you're a wife, husband, and 2 kids, what used to be considered really good money, like $85,000 to $100,000 a year, it's just not that great anymore.
No.
You can easily, especially with the current price of housing and food and gas, I mean, you can easily burn through that pretty quickly without being, if you're not very, very disciplined with the way that you spend. I like the concept of Dave's debt snowball, where we take the smallest balance, pay it off, and then roll that payment and really pay it off. I like applying that same kind of concept to, how do I build my income, right? Let's take a little bit of extra money and put it into something here. And if that can start generating some income, keep rolling that snowball forward that way. Because ultimately, I think that's the real way to building your wealth, building financial freedom, is getting to that point where we can invest. And yeah, it's risky. You might, the first few things you try, you might just lose your investment, but you're not gonna, there's only so far you can go depending on what your career path is without trying to build something on your own.
Well, every successful business started off with somebody willing to take a risk.
Right.
And probably most successful businesses were built by somebody who took a risk, and the risk didn't pay off at some point. So that's just part of it. Rick, couple of thoughts. So on generating a little extra income, I've done, by the way, umpiring baseball games. I umpired high school baseball games, and I officiated high school basketball games for the reasons that you just mentioned. Like, this is a side hustle that I'm using to accelerate, putting myself in a more advantageous financial position. One of the things that, Dave Ramsey, he recommends people deliver pizzas, which our boy, CJ over at the pizza factory tells me all the time that they need drivers, and that the drivers pull down somewhere around $30 an hour.
Yeah.
between tips and, that's pretty good pay, right? So if you put in an extra 10 or 15 hours a week delivering pizzas, I'm no mathematician, but that's an extra $450 a week. That would be an extra $1,800 a month that you could build an emergency fund, pay down some debt. And then DoorDash,
Mhm.
just out of kind of curiosity, I became a dasher. I've only done it a couple of times, but I imagine that over the long haul, it would be about the same, 25 to $30 an hour.
Mhm.
Something almost anybody could do, right? It's just a matter of being willing to do it. The other thing was when I was still in full-time vocational ministry and had almost no experience or understanding about business or money or how it all works. My first venture into the business world was through a network marketing company called Monavie.
Mhm.
It was like an acai, health and wellness business.
Drink, right? Yeah.
And during its apex, it was really quite remarkable and it paid well. And there was a point where I didn't even really become all that high up on the food chain and have a big downline, but I think I was still making an extra $1,000 a month or so just working that business. But one of the things that kind of came up was like, okay, and I'm starting to see the light. Maybe you can shed some light on this. Is to start an LLC and have a pass through to where you can start enjoying some tax deductions if you have a side hustle like that.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to start an LLC. Any business that you go through as you're kind of like you are the business, right? This gig economy stuff, like um, you know, DoorDash or whatever, or somebody who's not paying you on a W-2. Let's say if you were refereeing or umpiring games and they're just paying you cash and you're going to get a 1099. You could use what we call a Schedule C, a sole proprietorship business. You don't have to start an LLC to do that and still take deductions. Um, I especially in California, I generally recommend against people going out and forming an LLC right away. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But one of the major reasons is just compliance and a minimum corporate tax. California has a minimum corporate tax of $800 a year. Plus, you have some additional compliance stuff to have any kind of a corporation, which includes an LLC. So you don't need to rush out, especially if you're in California, and form that LLC. You can still take deductions against that income just on a Schedule C as a sole proprietor, just under your social security number. And if you decide you want to have like a special business name, you want it to be Brian's whatever bookkeeping, whatever it might be, right? You can go file a DBA through the county, put your little DBA notice in any local paper. And then you can go get a separate tax identification number in 5 minutes from the IRS, and you're no longer using your social. You have an official business name. You don't need an LLC necessarily to do that. Now, if you're growing to the point where, hey, we've got a significant business here, maybe I have some personal assets I want to protect, those sorts of things. Now we're totally talking about forming an LLC, but don't rush out and make that your first step with a brand new business that you don't know if you're going to succeed or not yet with.
Well, that makes sense. And then there's some things like your car or maybe some other things, and you can maybe inform the audience some things that, are monthly expenses to the average American that they could begin taking a deduction if they simply have a sole proprietorship or
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
they can start
Perfect.
enjoying some tax benefits.
Yeah. Normally what the best way to tackle the car issue as a sole proprietor is track business mileage, right? So right now it's like 62 cents a mile for a deduction for business mileage. So you can do that manually. You can, a lot of people go after the fact, especially if they have normal business like driving that they do, and just Google Maps and figure out what their miles are. There's even a lot of apps like Mile IQ is a good one that every time, if it's on your phone, every time you drive, it asks, hey, was this business or personal? And it keeps track of your business miles that way for you. So that's a good one. But a lot of things that you're normally spending money on that you don't realize, that can be a business deduction, like your cell phone, right? A lot of people, if you have any kind of business, we're so tied to these phones for business now that legitimately, I think a lot of people are using their cell phones 75, 80% for business versus it used to be, 20, 30, 40, 50%. So you can take a portion of that cell phone bill. If you have a home office space, right? Now we're talking about, let's say you have a 400 square foot home office and you've got a 2,000 square foot home. Well, that's 20% of all your household expenses, insurance, repairs,
Oh, wow.
utilities, interest, that are now potentially a business expense, right?
Mm,
The thing about the home office deduction, you can't take your business below zero. So once your business income, like minus expenses, is zero, you can't take any more home office deduction. But if you're generating income and then you're able to wipe out that income with expenses that would have been there anyway, that's great. Now we have basically some tax-free income because we were able to wipe it out with that home office deduction.
wow. So what if you were, so let's say the median household income here in the desert's $80,000. I'm just taking a guess. That's household, so it's husband and wife. Um, what would you just, is this a speculation? How much could the average homeowner realize in tax deductions? 10 grand?
I mean, it really depends on what you're doing, but yeah, it's not unreasonable to let's say you have $80,000 on W-2, right? And let's say you have this other little business that generates $12,000, $1,000 a month, right? Okay. It's not unreasonable to think, hey, I can get that $12,000 possibly tax free through these deductions, and maybe I get an extra $4,000 or $5,000 of actual, like, I can actually bring that business below zero, because I have these legitimate expenses. So now I'm taking my $80,000. I'm really at like 92 because I have this $12,000 and I have these other legitimate expenses. I'm
Mhm.
bringing my taxable down, my adjusted gross income down to 75 before I get other deductions for taxable income. It's totally possible. And if you're in a 22% bracket and let's say you're getting 5,000 additional tax deduction, right? Well, what is that? 10% is 500. So that's about $1,200 that you're getting additional off your taxes. Plus you're able to generate some additional income that you can spend.
Well, that is dying. I mean, so by my math, you're talking about what you're going to realize is about a $20,000 raise.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. When
Yeah.
you consider the tax savings plus, the income that you have in, and, sometimes you're going to spend some money to make that money. But a lot of times when we're talking about things like cell phone, home office, car miles, like a lot of this stuff you would be spending anyway. And now we're getting some tax benefit off of it.
Rick, what a wealth of knowledge. Last question before we get you out of here. Um, if there were one piece of advice that you would give to the average family, maybe struggling to make ends meet, they always have more month than money. Maybe an insider tip, something that they could do to improve themselves financially in the next 30 to 60 days, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough question. Um, I would say, I mean, I think the number one thing for people like that, I would give them two pieces of advice. I think one of Dave Ramsey's very, very good things is what he calls like the zero based budget or dollar budgeting, right? So we know where every dollar is going. I think when you're struggling to pay your bills, you've got to start there, right? Because a lot of people have money going out that maybe doesn't really need to go out and they don't even realize it. How many of us are paying for a Netflix and a Hulu and a Disney Plus and whatever else? And then how much are we actually watching it? I actually just recently canceled my Netflix. I've been meaning to cancel it for a long time, but it would, my wife and I had talked about it and it was just like, how often are we using this? And I just logged in and canceled it. We're not using it enough to justify $20 a month, you know? So I think that's a really good place to start. Let's see where all of your dollars are going, right? And find out, is there anything we can cut out? And then number two is what we talked about earlier. Hey, what time do I have? What opportunities do I have to add a little side hustle so I can dig myself out of this hole that I feel like we're in every month? I think those are the first main two things that you can do if you're in that situation that can improve your situation. And the old adage of like, you have to have money to make money, it really is true, right? So we've got to dig ourselves out of that hole and put away some money so that we can open up some opportunities to improve our lives long term. And it's a dig, or it's a grind to get there, and you have to want it for sure. But I think that if you can dedicate yourself to doing those two things, you're going to improve your life in the next 30 to 60 days. And if you can improve your life over 30 to 60 days, you can then kind of see that light on how do I continue this improvement.
Wow. We need to have you back on. We'll talk a little bit about investing and smart places to put some money to start building some assets. But boy, the last 20 minutes has been remarkable. I hope it helps a lot of people. You're a great friend, a great man, a smart mind, one of the smartest people I know. We can't say thank you enough for coming on today.
Thanks for having me again, Brian. Anytime you want me back on.
Let's do it again soon.
All right, bud.
Rick Ardito, Dr. Rick Ardito, everybody. What a treasure trove of information. So let's get to this week's market update. Before we do that, be sure to like, share, and subscribe this video or the podcast. By doing that, you help spread the word, and we can help more and more people, add value to them, helping them not only in real estate, but in life. Okay, market update. This is for May the 1st. As a little bit of a side note, I did add into our analysis Hellendale, whereas before we only had Victorville, Apple Valley, Hesperia, Adelanto, Phelan, and Oak Hills, the 6 kind of main municipalities here in the desert. I added Hellendale because there's about 4,000 homes out there, and they do impact our market more so than places like Lucerne, Barstow, Wrightwood, Phelan, or Wrightwood and Pinion Hills. So having said that, in the last 30 days, we sold 368 homes. So we are seeing a little bit of an uptick, as we should, in the spring market. And the median sale price for those 368 homes was $410,000. Okay, so to help you get your mind wrapped around what those numbers look like year over year. So you go back 1 year to 2022 in the same period. That would be April 1st. It's actually, I did to May 2nd because the 2nd was a Monday. There were 560 homes that sold in that same period 1 year ago. So we're down 34% year over year. Why is that? Well, affordability is a factor, but the number one issue we're facing is inventory. If we had more homes listed for sale, we would sell more of them. And we're only down 2.3%. And I was just kind of chatting with Dr. Ardito about this during the pre-show, that the affordability is down about $700. Okay. Or yeah, it's going to cost you about $700 more per month to buy that same house at $420,000 as it did a year ago, but we're only down 2% in our value. So let's do those numbers real quick. Okay, let's say a year ago, your payment would have been, just for round figures, $2,300. And today it would be $3,000 for the same house. So $700 difference. We're looking at a 30% increase in payment. And the value is only down 2%. So if you're to juxtapose those two pieces of information, the homes 1 year ago were 30% more affordable, and we're only down 2% in the median sale price. So if all things were equal, what would be logical if the housing market were, I guess, in some kind of trouble or there were issues, the prices would have come down 30% if the affordability came down in 30%. But the prices have only come down 2%. What does this tell us? This tells us that the constriction of supply and the lack of inventory, you have competing factors, right? You have higher rates and lower affordability against low inventory, and they're competing against each other. And the low inventory is winning because the house prices are about the same as they were when the homes were more affordable. If you're thinking about buying a house, now is the time. If you wait until prices soften, the home prices will escalate even more so than they are now. So you're cutting your nose to spite your face. So 3 things. If you buy your house now and the interest rates increase, you save money. If you buy your house now and the interest rates decrease, you can refinance and save money. If you buy your house now and the interest rates stay the same, you're likely A, to save money on price increases a year or 2 from now. And secondly, you're going to save time. And during that same period of time, if you're renting where you're paying 100% of your income or your rent in interest, you're going to save money that way. Whereas over the same period of time, you could reduce a principal balance and gain equity. Okay, so in escrow, we have 621 homes in escrow. So again, that's an uptick. And then the active listings, we'd like to see 1,500, 1,700, 800, even 2,000 homes, or about 3 months of supply. 3 months of supply. So if you take in escrow 621, multiply that times, or I'm sorry, the last 30 days sold. Take that number. So just round it to 400 and you multiply that times 3. That would be roughly 1,200 in escrow or active listings. That would be more of an equilibrium on the market if there were 1,200 homes in escrow. In other words, there's kind of plenty of homes for sale and you've got plenty of buyers and there's equilibrium. Right now, we only have 629 or less than 2 months of supply. That's a tight market. What this means is, particularly if it's around the median sale price, 410, there's more competition for those homes. You're going to have multiple offers coming in. You're not going to get the same closing credits that you were getting even just a couple of months ago. It's going to be more difficult to negotiate repairs. And this market condition does not appear. We've been doing this show now. This is episode 14. So that's 14 weeks. We're more than 1 quarter in. This market condition does not appear to be going away anytime soon. Per Pride Stromstead over at Vintage Lending, today's current interest rate, this is, again, a 30-year fixed FHA with a mid-credit score of 660. You're going to expect to pay about 5.75 to 5.85%. And that is this week's market update. All right, one last thing. This is the Check This Out segment. And I'm going to recommend to you, today we talked a lot about Dave Ramsey, and I happen to be an endorsed local provider for Dave Ramsey with Ramsey Trusted. But this came from then. It's an app called Every Dollar. So Dr. Ardito talked about, man, the first step is let's start tracking every dollar, where every dollar has a name. You know, you're going to get paid on the 1st and 15th or whatever your paychecks are, that you sit down in writing and assign every dollar a name. And when your finances are in order, you can even assign a certain amount of that to fun, right? You can say, well, I'm going to spend this much amount of money on fun. This is a really cool app that will do that for you. And you can download it either from, Apple or Google. And it's something maybe to help you out and help get your finances together and get your finances in order. And listen, no judgment coming from me. We are all on this journey together, and I'm working on our finances, and I manage a business, so it's all part of the struggle. So I hope with that you have a fabulous day and a fabulous week, and until the next time on the Brian Hirsch Show, we're serving your dreams. Have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon.